We are about to begin track 1, Tackling Extreme Poverty, co-curated by BRAC International and Trickle Up. To deliver the keynote address, I request Shamiron Abed, Executive Director, BRAC International, to come on stage.
Thank you, Zafreen. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm so happy to be back at this summit after a few years, and I'm privileged to be able to talk about a topic that is very close to my heart, which is our collective pursuit to end extreme poverty. I'd like to express my sincere thanks to Access for organizing this important summit every year, bringing the development community together and sustaining momentum around the critical issue of livelihoods for the poor, even in the midst of the multiple issues that vie for our attention and energy during these difficult times. Let me begin there with the many complex, evolving, and growing challenges we find ourselves in. We have not yet emerged from the shadow of COVID, and its impact still looms large over the global economy and indeed over all of our lives. We are coming out of a year of extraordinary weather events, including the calamitous heat wave here in India last year, when temperatures almost broke the bounds of human survivability. Those of us living in this part of the world have long been experiencing the real impact of global warming. But this is no longer a world where a handful of countries are on the front lines. Powerful storms, unprecedented floods, and raging wildfires have brought home the fact that no matter where you are in the world, no one is beyond the reach of the consequences of climate change. Along with COVID and climate, there is the third C, conflict, with the war in Ukraine destabilizing a fragile global peace and leading to a worldwide spike in food and energy prices. We are in the throes of a crisis the likes of which most of us have not seen in our lifetimes. And sadly, whether it's COVID, conflict, or climate, it's always the poorest of the poor who are the hardest hit. For several decades, we made steady progress on reducing not only the percentage of people in extreme poverty, but the absolute numbers of people in extreme poverty. In the last few years, the compounding shocks of the three Cs have caused the numbers of people living in extreme poverty to rise for the first time in many decades. The World Bank has already stated that SDG 1, the global goal of ending extreme poverty by 2030, will unfortunately not be met. Halfway through the SDGs, this is a bleak conclusion, and one whose reality is the continued suffering of hundreds of millions of people. What does this mean for us, for the organizations we work for, and for the causes we are committed to? The UN created the SDG 1 and coined the term leave no one behind to ensure members of the international community were investing in the people who were the farthest behind, living in poverty with limited access to resources and skills to escape the cycle. SDG 1 has been central to the work of so many of us, a rallying cry for both development organizations and governments. As we face up to the grim reality that this will not be achieved by 2030, it is hard not to feel that we have failed, that with SDG 1, yet another development target will be left unachieved, and leave no one behind, just another tagline. However, this is not the time to feel helpless or give up hope. Now more than ever, we need solutions that work, solutions that empower people in poverty and create opportunities for them to engage in sustainable, inclusive livelihoods that really do leave no one behind. And these solutions are not far out of reach. While there are many things we cannot control, there are many things we know and have learned through many years of hard work on these complex issues, which can be applied and scaled to ensure that we get back on track in our pursuit to end extreme poverty. We are here in India to learn more about many of them, like Jivika's SJY program and NRLM's national push on inclusive livelihoods. I will take this opportunity to share with you some of what we have learned through our work in tackling extreme poverty at BRAC. When my father, Sir Fazle Abed, founded BRAC in the early 1970s, the newly independent Bangladesh had just emerged from a bloody war and following the deadliest tropical cyclone ever recorded in human history. But even in the midst of the economic devastation wrought by war and disaster, working with the poorest of the poor, he realized that poverty was more than the lack of income and assets. It was also a lack of hope. People ground down by generations of despair and struggle felt their condition was immutable. If poverty reduction programs were to succeed, they would not only have to provide the services and access to resources and opportunities that people have been denied for so long, but also build self-esteem and confidence in a better future. People living in poverty would need to be subjects and not the objects of development programs. And the role of development organizations like BRAC would have to be to empower people so that they can go from being passive recipients of aid to becoming active participants in their own development. Over the last 50 years, we have seen this proven time and again. To end poverty, we need to kindle people's belief in the possibility of change, even as we create the enabling conditions for that change to happen through better services, resources, and opportunities. Doing this effectively, though, requires us to be innovative and adaptive to changing circumstances. At BRAC, we have been steadfast in our belief that this holistic approach, but our programming has continuously evolved in response to complex, intersectional, and shifting challenges faced by the poor. We have grown from an initial focus on consciousness raising in our earlier years to expanding women's access to finance, training women in different skills and trades, creating markets to sustain those livelihoods, and developing infrastructure and value chains to grow these markets. Continuously developing and scaling different interventions with community members and linking multiple solutions together to strengthen entire ecosystems that now support a whole range of sustainable livelihoods for tens of millions of people. These experiences and lessons have only become more relevant over time. As we think about how to help people pull themselves out of poverty sustainably, we must think about multifaceted interventions that support both the social and economic empowerment of the individual and the community. When we talk of livelihoods, we often think of something purely economic. But for livelihoods to be truly sustainable, inclusive, and resilient, the elements of personal belief and confidence, community acceptance and engagement, of social empowerment more broadly, all have an important role. Nothing demonstrates this better than our work on ultra-poverty and the advent of the ultra-poor graduation approach, which celebrated its 20th anniversary last year. The graduation approach was designed to break the poverty trap for those in the harshest forms of poverty with a boost of multiple sequenced interventions. These interventions empower people to become self-reliant and resilient, connecting them to social protection to meet their basic needs, providing training and assets for income generation, financial literacy and saving support, and promoting social empowerment through community engagement and life skills training, all facilitated through in-person coaching. Each of these elements is critical to the success of the others, but the real magic is the hope and sense of possibility that the women develop through the close mentorship they receive. Ultra-poor graduation programs build the adaptive capacity of those living in extreme poverty and has been proven to work across diverse contexts and populations. Currently, there are more than 100 such programs in more than 50 countries. Rigorous long-term research carried out on these programs have shown consistent and compelling impact. The vast majority of participants not only sustain progress, but continue to make further progress years after they graduate from these programs because of the resilience and the confidence they attain. In the age of COVID, conflict, and climate, our response needs to be bigger and bolder than ever before, but they need not always be new or different from the hard-won lessons of the past. There are evidence-based solutions that exist that can work even as new challenges emerge, because they rely on the one thing that we have found to be universal, that when the right conditions are created, even the poorest of the poor can transform their lives. My father used to say, "Small is beautiful, but large is necessary." New ideas are important, but if if we're always innovating and piloting, we will never rise to the challenge of tackling extreme poverty at the sheer scale needed to make a real difference. Ladies and gentlemen, the end of extreme poverty seems like an ambitious goal. To many, talking about it at a time like this might even sound foolhardy. Just as millions of people still believe that it is their fate to be poor, that their poverty is somehow ordained by a higher power, many of us feel that the challenges we are facing are too big or too many, the headwinds too strong. If you take away one thing from all that I have said here today, let it be this: we have the resources, the evidence, and the know-how to end extreme poverty for good. What we need to do now is mobilize political will, which is necessary to scale impactful, evidence-backed interventions that we know work. And it is very important that India continues to take a lead on this, especially this year as it chairs the G20. While we will miss the 2030 deadline, we must ensure that we are the last generation on Earth that still has people living in such dehumanizing forms of poverty and deprivation. Those still in such harsh forms of poverty demand and deserve nothing less from us. Thank you all very much for listening.
As rightly pointed out by Shamaron, whether it's COVID, conflict, or climate, the poorest of the poor are the hardest hit. And if the right conditions are created, even the poorest of the poor can survive. With this, thank you, Shamaron. Now I would like to welcome the moderator of the session, Models of Tracking Extreme Poverty, Experiences from the Global South, Syed M. Hashemi, Professor, BRAC University. Professor, requesting you to kindly come on stage. I would also like to invite on stage our distinguished panelists for the session: Nathalie Ladler-Kylander, President Trikala; Shri Bala Murugan D., Secretary, Rural Development Department, Government of Bihar; John Paul, Director, Center for Rural Development, the Nudge Institute; Florentino Y. Loyola Jr., Assistant Secretary for Specialized Programs, Department of Social Welfare and Development, Government of Philippines; Sharanya Chandran, Director, Policy and Communications, JPAL, South Asia at IFMR; Dear guest, Shri Bala Murugan is not here with us today. Thank you. Professor Hashmi, requesting you to kindly begin the session.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Welcome, everyone. I hope you listened to Shamaron very closely, intently, and I hope his message resonates with all of you in terms of our vision, our ambitions, our dreams. Because as he said, it is doable. And the biggest thing that's required is to build hope amongst those who have no hope in many situations, who feel helpless. Hope and agency. That's what Shamaron said, and that's fundamentally important. Of course, we from the outside, are we in power in some ways or others? We who are more privileged can come up with ideas, can assist and help. But it's ultimately the poor and the powerless, those who have been disenfranchised, those who live only at the margins. Reclaim this land, reclaim the space, reclaim their present and look forward to their future. That's what I take from Shamaron's presentation, Shamaron's thoughts. Agency, of the poor and building hope. Because we do have the experience and we do have the resources to try to adapt, to try to understand structures of power, how to combat that, and how to build a transformational agenda. My own journey on extreme poverty started about 25, 26 years ago when, as an academic, I realized that in Bangladesh, where we were making major advances, and we have been over the last 2-3 decades, in terms of poverty alleviation, and even through microfinance providing access to poor people to build their livelihoods, there was a large group of people who were getting left out. Later on, they were dubbed as those living below extreme poverty. So that became an issue for me academically. And then when I turned to BRAC, looked at the BRAC experience, I realized not only were they recognizing that, not only were they thinking of that, but they were constantly trying to come up with solutions on how to address that. That is part of BRAC's DNA. And while I've never worked for BRAC, I have always been close to them, and I've always appreciated the great struggles they have made to come up with solutions that are scalable. So even before the graduation program we talked about, there were other efforts at BRAC. But when graduation came around, I had joined the World Bank at that time. I found this to be one perfectly effective way of resolving some of the issues around extreme poverty. And while we all know that some living in extreme poverty will not be looking at a livelihoods pathway, but will be looking at entitlements, we need to advocate with the government to fulfill their constitutional obligations to take care of the citizenry who are getting economically excluded. So in India, for example, pensions, old age pensions, widow pensions, access to health care, access to education, all that become important. And in this case, for the 10, 15, 20% of those living in extreme poverty, it would be those kinds of entitlements, and we need to make sure they are linked up to that. But then for a great majority, this pathway of livelihoods, building that, is doable, it's possible. And yes, it's going to be a multi-dimensional, big push that BRAC has developed. In other countries, it would be something else, but it has to be a big push with resources tied to that in whatever forms. And one critical element in BRAC's graduation programming that is critical in terms of wherever we work with those that are excluded is to work with them to build their confidence, their self-respect, making sure they understand that they have the power to organize and collectively, not just individually, but collectively have voice and take collective control over their lives. And there have been many impact studies around graduation programming, which, as Shamiran said, is spread around the world. They all show that it works. In some cases, it hasn't. It's not going to be a 100% thing. But it does work. There's irrefutable evidence around that. So when we were working in India, when we came to India, I've been coming to India for the last 25 years or so, and many over here I've known for years and years and years. When I look at India, when I come to India, I'm struck with a couple of things. On the positive side, so many entitlement programs for the poorest, for tribal groups that exist where they need to be linked in. So that's a great plus. The SHG movement, I've been very impressed initially in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when I was looking at the SHG model. It was working really well in some states, Andhra, for example. In some, it wasn't taking off. But now I see a generalized model, and the thing I like about the SHG model is the federated structures where that gives voice, collective political voice, collective economic voice. So you have that. What I, however, see as some of the, and you have so many organizations that have so effectively been working with the poor. We have some of them here. There's, of course, Pradhan, who's been here for a long time doing this, Bandhan, Trickle Up, and many others, including other organizations that have moved from microfinance to more holistic approaches. So you have that. That human resources are there. A couple of things I felt needs to be rethought and re-emphasized, and that is the role of mentoring. It is there, but that needs to be far more intense. That mentoring, and especially if we're working with tribal populations, it's a different approach, it's a different understanding. It's different sets of structural constraints they have faced over the years. How to deal with that, and how to use maybe some of the organic structures they already have, the organic networks they have, to push together this notion of unified collective strategies. So, first of all, the issue of figuring out who are the excluded, and you've been doing a lot of work around that. In fact, the reason why we got involved, and I was there at the early stages of Jivika's SJY design. First question is, who's getting left out? How do we bring them in? The second is, how do we create this big push? What are the different elements that already exist? What additionality needs to happen? And here again, the coaching and mentoring is a crucial thing. Thirdly, I find, while I've been talking about graduation and pushing graduation around the world on my different hats, but always a BRAC advocate, my hat as a World Bank person, spreading it across different countries, I realize one big missing part will be the market. It's one thing for a group of women to come together and raise cows or have small shops. But how do you do the breakthrough? And of course, we have Kurian to thank way back, Dr. Kurian, way back early on, to show how value chains can be organized to benefit poor farmers. And here you've got also FPOs that are there. Important to link these up to the women who engage in small livelihoods. How to make sure they become the owners, how they become controllers and managers of the value chains. That is a task that remains to be done. It's already happening in many cases, you have the experience, but putting together so we build an ecosystem that is pro-poorest, an ecosystem that encourages the disenfranchised to come together. And remember, one last thing, the aspirations. Poor people, the poorest, they have aspirations. We need to encourage those aspirations. And the aspirations aren't just one of transcending the narrow confines of poverty. It is aspirations of joining the emerging middle class. And to what extent do we build ladders to fulfill some of those aspirations? To ensure the systems and the support network that they can use to change their own destiny and become, at least in the near future, part of the growing middle class. Thank you very much. We have a distinguished group of speakers who will be sharing their experiences so far. I've asked them to be very brief, keep it to 8 minutes, and Shubhangi will help me with the time so that we can have a lot more time for questions and discussions. I would like to request my friend from Trickle Up, Natalie, who is the CEO of Trickle Up, to speak. Incidentally, in 2003-04, it was Trickle Up and Bandhan, who I worked very closely with, who started the first graduation pilots in India. So Natalie?
Do you want me to go?
It's up to you. I think so.
Yeah.
Makes it more visible.
Thank you so much, Hashmi. It's such a privilege and it's so exciting for me to be here. Back in 2001, I was a graduate student at Harvard Business School writing Harvard Business School cases, and I came to Bangladesh to write a case study on BRAC. And it was an extraordinary experience for me, and it is so exciting 20 years later to head up an organization who emulates and tries to emulate and hopefully works closely with BRAC. So it's an immense privilege to be here. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on Trickle Up and the work that we do, as well as the focus that we have. Trickle Up has been working in the area of livelihoods for over 40 years, and we've always focused on the most marginalized and the extreme poor, striving to build pathways out of poverty. During that time, I'd say we've been really focused on innovation, and innovation in a couple of ways. Innovating in terms of how graduation might work for different populations, and innovating in terms of pushing the boundaries of traditional graduation programs to better fit the needs of the populations we serve. We're currently working in India, Latin America, and in Africa. In Africa, we focus particularly on refugees and displaced people. In India, we have a team of about 20 people, and they've been here for several decades. And it is for Trickle Up the focus of growth in the future. There's tremendous opportunity here, as well as tremendous need. 97% of the population that we support are women, rural women in extreme poverty, and they are some of the most marginalized and vulnerable people on this planet. These include people with disabilities, particularly vulnerable tribal groups, indigenous people, to mention just a few. And it's really important, this focus on the most vulnerable and most marginalized, because our mission statement is to partner with women in extreme poverty to build economic opportunity and drive inclusion. And this inclusion part of our mission is very important to us. Most of these populations have been discriminated against and excluded both economically and socially. Our model is based on the graduation approach and includes components of training, coaching, savings groups, and capital or asset transfers. And we've always worked in partnership, whether it's partnership with small local nonprofit organizations, local governments, other organizations and nonprofits, or even international organizations. We hope to build their capacity and implement programs together. I think that's the only way we're going to create sustained impacts, as if we work collaboratively, and collaboration is one of our three key goals. I'd say we have two major areas of strength. The first is targeting and selecting, and that really goes to the point that Hashmi made about finding and including the most vulnerable and most excluded. And we've developed a very robust system for being able to do that. The second thing I think we're very good at is coaching. And this again goes back to the target population that we serve. So coaching for us is both at an individual level and a group level, and it really enables that personal transformation that we've been speaking about in terms of what women think is possible, both for themselves and their future and their families. And so coaching is really fundamental to the work that we do in helping that personal transformation that's so important to both what the previous two speakers have talked about. Our vision for the future is to reach a total of 5 million people, and we can only do this by scaling through partnerships with others. We have three components to our scaling strategy that work together. The first is innovation, which I've mentioned before, but which is fundamental to our work. One of those innovations here in India is our UPMA program, the Ultra Poor Market Access. We've been working with women from tribal groups to form farmer interest groups and then integrate into farmer producing organizations or FPOs. Just last week, my colleagues and I witnessed 1,000 women from extremely poor backgrounds become shareholders in a major FPO. And that really speaks to this idea of inclusion and ladders that Heshmi described. The second part of our scaling strategy is what we term catalysis, which is really enabling others to use what we've learned and implement programming to serve these populations. Finally, we want to be able to disseminate things that we've learned in a way that we can help the entire field. It is only by working together, doing what we know works, that we all collectively know works, that we will be able to reduce and eliminate extreme poverty. So I look forward to your questions, and thank you so much for your attention.
Bala Murugan, Secretary, Rural Development, Government of Bihar, was supposed to be here. I met him last Tuesday. He apologized for not being able to come. But just to say that Jivika, that started the SJY program, which is graduation program, is the excellent example of how a government can take on these programs for the poorest and make it happen in a large scale. They've already covered 150,000 women. They're going to move up to 200,000 and even go beyond that. And Bala Murugan was the heart and soul of driving this forward. So we miss him, but he did apologize to me for not being able to make it. As I said, I've worked with many organizations in India. The new one, the new kid on the block, Nudge, I had not known them till 6 months ago. And they have so massively impressed me. It's unbelievable. Both their commitment, but also how meticulously they plan things in working with poor, and how their field staff is so good. I haven't yet visited any of your field sites. I look forward to it. But we wanted somebody from the Nudge from Nudge to be able to talk, and it's my pleasure to invite John Paul, who is Director, Center for Rural Development at the Nudge.
Thank you, Professor Hashmi. Good afternoon, everyone. Tough slot right after lunch. And to speak to the audience right after this, but it's a very it's a topic close to our hearts at the Nudge. As Professor Hashmi put it, we are just about starting to learn, I would say. Natalie spoke about visiting BRAC and being inspired. How coincidental that the Nudge too visited BRAC in 2018 and spent time on the field, on the ground, was inspired, came back to Jharkhand and said, let's try our hand at it. So very similar journeys, but it shows the power of committing to the cause and demonstrating impact, which BRAC has been doing for 20 years. I'm here to specifically talk about the vision that we see for graduation approach, scaling, and being adopted by various governments in India, and what we are trying to do and what we are observing and learning along the way. So I'll talk about 5 things. One of the first most important things, as we have learned and continue to learn, is what is ultra poverty? And this question is especially important in India. It's important for many reasons, two in particular. One, action, whether it is through graduation approach or graduation approach like variants, action is downstream of clarity. Do we know what ultra poverty means? Can we size ultra poverty, especially when large amounts of resource allocation is in question? And of course, how do we select and target? And that's something that both Bihar, Jharkhand now with Upaj are beautifully answering by integrating it into the community institutions. But this question is going to come back to the journey of graduation approach scaling in India repeatedly. And that's an area that we are focusing on a lot in our work in partnership with the Ministry of Rural Development. And we've been very encouraged by the acceptance of approaches as wide-ranging as your traditional surveys to machine learning to data science, some of which I'll be very happy to share. It's really, really encouraged us. But that's an important piece for us in this journey. How do we start it with the most upstream problem? The second one, there is a lot of excitement about graduation approach being picked up by Bihar in the form of SJY and being integrated into the community institutions. And there is a reason for this excitement, and so there is excitement at Jharkhand as well. It's because an approach that originated in Bangladesh can fit so well into a community institution infrastructure that's been developed in India, because the fundamental principles scale, the principles of targeting, hand-holding, big push, and how Bihar has managed to integrate it so beautifully within the community institution infrastructure has been very encouraging. And the third thing is, how do we learn from this? That again is something that we hear the community of graduation approach practitioners talk about all the time. How do we learn continuously, because this is still very early stages, I would say. How does this now work within this community institution infrastructure? How does this work for different contexts of ultra poverty? Different challenges that we might face on the ground, and that requires a framework of a commitment to continuous learning. And we see that in Bihar with JPAL partnering with the government to feed back into this development process in an iterative manner. And we see that in Jharkhand as well, with XISS coming in to support and learn, and I'm sure this will happen, and it has to happen in each context. And so this commitment to learning and the learnings coming out is going to help this community a lot, and we want to play a role there. A simple example is to just see the number of professionals who have come out of Bihar who are now working in various contexts. Their appreciation for ultra poverty, for graduation approach has increased, and with more players joining this journey, it's only going to improve, and we need more of this. We need more non-profit civil society organizations, professionals starting to practice or get into this space. I was having a conversation with Natalie 2 weeks ago, and we sort of vigorously nodded and agreed to this one thing one of the most important things in graduation approach is to know what to measure and how to measure. And that's my next point. There's a lot of work happening across the world in unpacking graduation approach to know which of these fundamental design components are working, why they are working, when and to what extent. And to be able to unpack it, we need to know how to measure and what to measure. But then to be able to use that learning, break down those principles and integrate that into a community institution infrastructure. So how do we do selection in the context of the community institutions? And it's beautifully done in SJY, in Upaj. How do we do hand-holding? in the context of community institutions and Big Push and so on and so forth. It's a fantastic framework that we have available in India, and how we do it and how we do it well will depend a lot on how we measure and monitor, and this is something that Mr. Bala, who couldn't be here, emphasized when we met him in 2020, that focus on and commit to monitoring as a means to learning, and he's been able to set up a partnership under an umbrella of many people coming together to learn and contribute to this. So that's the next one. So how do we monitor well? The last piece is, I truly believe that graduation approaches principles coming together with the community institution framework that we have in India can truly unlock the potential of graduation approach to target the ultra poor, to deliver the outcomes that we want delivered, especially as Professor Hashmi pointed out, with a wide-ranging series of social security programs that can be very nicely converged into the graduation approach. Looking to the future, I feel we must do all of these things. We must bring clarity to the definition of ultra poverty. We must integrate it into the larger frameworks that we have available in India so readily. We need to continue to learn, monitor. But I also feel that bringing evidence out and sharing it in forums like this is only going to build enthusiasm. I am very confident, and that's the confidence that has given us at the Nudge the energy to commit for the long run. I remember talking to Mr. Bala in 2020, and Shamaran spoke about the need for political will, the need to look at evidence-based solutions to target any number of problems that we have or might come up, and the only way to look towards is evidence-based programs. And Bala said the same thing, but very importantly he said that in his long and accomplished career, this is the one program that has given him true satisfaction. And when you find that, and when you hear that from a senior civil servant, that gives you a lot of confidence and conviction that this is the right approach. Thank you.
Thank you. We now turn to a group from the Philippines. In the Philippines, I've been actually working with Asian Development Bank and Philippines government, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, and talking about pathways for the poorest, the graduation program, telling them about BRAC and the strategies. And their DSWD actually taught me about the need for convergence. The Department of Social Welfare and Development already has, still do, 3 programs. One is a cash transfer program for very poor people. Second, a community mobilization program. And third, a livelihood program. And they were talking about amongst themselves and telling me that if we could converge the 3 together, because it's under the same department, and if we could add a focus on mentoring, then we would have the graduation pathway without the need for any large external funding for that. And I've been going back since then many times. In fact, about 2-3 weeks ago, over a Zoom meeting, I was there talking to some of the DSWD people, and I see a real potential to do a scale-up graduation with them. So anyway, we have someone from DSWD, and I wanted him to share a little bit of the DSW story and what is possible in the Philippines. Thank you. I invite Florentina Loyola to speak.
Thank you, Hashmi. A pleasant afternoon to everyone who's here right now. And this is my first time no, to be on stage talking with you. Of course, the Philippines, just like Indonesia, we have a very serious problem in terms of poverty. Based on our list, or the list of poor households that was launched last year, the number of the poor households rose to 15 million families, or 30 million people, equivalent to 27% of the total population in the Philippines. The number increased around 5 million from the previous list because of the pandemic and the calamities that hit the Philippines. Now, the Philippine government, through the Department of Social Welfare and Development, is doing its best to address the issues of the poor, the marginalized, and the vulnerable sectors through the social protection programs. I will just briefly discuss the three big ticket programs of the government that I currently oversee. Number one, the conditional cash transfer, which we call 4Ps in the Philippines. That's Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino program. This is a cash transfer program that it's like a human investment, no, in providing their basic needs to help the poor households to address their needs in terms of health, nutrition, and education. Roughly around 5,000 rupees a month is given to the poor households. It is on a bi-monthly scheme of a payout. So roughly 10,000 rupees per payout. So it's for the education of the children, elementary, high school, and senior high. And for the health, for the immunization and routine checkups of children and pregnant women. And we have rice subsidy. To be included in this program, you should be on the list of the National Household Targeting System. We call it the Listahanan 3. That was launched last year. So this program is for 7 years. This will last for 7 years. But it already started last 2007, but enacted to law last 2019. So the 7-year period starts last 2019. Okay, the next one is the Sustainable Livelihood Program. This is our, technically our graduation approach. Under this program, this is a capability building program. We improve the socio-economic condition of households. This program provides seed capital fund amounting to 15,000 pesos or around 21,000 rupees. That is a one-time payment, or one-time grant rather. The beneficiary will undergo series of trainings for around 6 to 7 months before the releasing of funds. So the business model will be based on what is lacking in their community. Since 2011, since the beginning of the program in 2011, now around 3.1 million beneficiaries had already served. And the last one, we have this community-driven development, which is called Kalahi Seeds, or the Kapit Bisig Laban sa Kahirapan, a comprehensive and integrated delivery of social services. For some reasons, this cannot be indirectly. It can complement indirectly because the concept of this program is targeting the different regions or different provinces in the Philippines which has the high number of poverty incidents. So we're not targeting individual, we're targeting community. And then this is, the project emanates from the community, depends on what they needed. For example, if they want If the poor community wants to have a farm-to-market road, they can propose the project. And then the funds will not go to the local government unit. It will be downloaded directly to the community. They will open a bank account. Then, after a series of meetings and consultations, the project will commence. So that's the 3 big-ticket programs in the Philippines. And we in the government are doing its best to give every Filipino people a comfortable life. And we in the department believes that every life is important, or bawat buhay mahalaga sa DSWD. Thank you and good afternoon.
We took the Philippines delegation to Bihar to see how Jivika's SJY program was working, so they could get some insights from there. And I'm assuming you were all thrilled, because that's what you told me. When we started at CGAP from 2003 onwards, 2002 actually, even while they were writing up, 2001-2, writing up the proposal for BRAC's graduation programming, when we started telling the world, different agencies, different countries, different governments, the one thing they said to us, well, you know, Bangladesh, maybe it works there, it'll work there, but how do we know it works anywhere else? So that's when we, from CGAP and the World Bank, took on the 10 pilots, 8 countries all over the world, 3 in Central Latin America, 2 in Sub-Saharan Africa, 1 in the Middle East, and 1 in Pakistan, and 3 in India. And we were doing it with the Ford Foundation, and we decided early on that in a lot of development programs, they have heart-wrenching stories of poor women, and they have nice pictures which really tug at your heart. These tell stories, very important stories. But for hard-headed policymakers, we really needed proof. We needed rigorous impact assessments. And at that time, we reached out to whom we thought were the best. And it was JPAL at that time with Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, who had not won the Nobel Prize at that time. And we reached out to professors at Yale University, New York University, and independently with BRAC, there was a London School of Economics doing impact assessments. And it was such a thrill when the joint paper they had jointly written came out in the Science Journal and it was made public that yes, this was not only an impactful program, that it was also cost effective in the long run. And that was one of the, after a few personal incidents, this was the best day of my life. So it's my privilege and my pleasure to invite Sharanya. I'm sorry, I keep on thinking of Sharanno, I'm Bengali, but Sharanya from JPAL South Asia to talk a little bit about the impact assessments and the role that JPAL is playing, not just in doing impact assessment, but also in promoting this vision of reaching the poorest and building pathways for them. Sharanya?
Thank you, Professor Hashmi. It's actually easy to go last because most of what you wanted to say has been covered. So I'll just do that. And I have a short presentation to walk you through this journey of how JPAL has, JPAL's journey with the graduation approach, really. But before I dive into that, I think a quick two-liner about JPAL for those who do not know. We are a research center headquartered at MIT and then turned into a global policy research think tank. And as Professor Hashmi said, it's not just rigorous impact evaluations, and we excel in randomized evaluations that we do across sectors, but I think the real work over the past decade has been how to translate this research into policy. To scale up evidence-based interventions and how JPAL can catalyze that, and to scale down equally that doesn't work and save some government money. And of course, capacity building of stakeholders on what is good monitoring, what is good evaluation. So I think in this journey, I think RCTs have a role to play and have had a role to play just to tease out the causal impact of the graduation approach and similar programs, right? Was it effective? If so, how effective? Were there unintended side effects? Which components worked? And this is actually, we were talking about this. This is something that we are still working on across the globe to tease out, because it has been evaluated as a whole. But which components are working? That's ongoing research as we look to scale this alongside. How cost-effective was the program? How does it compare to other programs to solve the same issue? So I think in this journey, this evidence and data has been super useful. And of course, now we are working across, in India, we are working on graduation, we are working on multiple other themes as well, and we are working with over 20 state governments, multiple other central ministries, with a range of NGOs, and supported by, of course, an interesting pool of donors. I think now moving on to the graduation approach and our journey with it. I think needless to say, enough has been said about the approach by all the panelists, but BRAC pioneered it years ago, and then it got replicated across, several countries that Dr. Hashmi just, walked us through, but essentially these countries, and it looks to combine support to address immediate needs of the poorest of the poor, but also longer-term investments in life skills, coaching, and technical training. And so this multifaceted 2-year-long program with carefully sequenced components like the productive asset transfer, identification of beneficiaries even before that, the technical skills training, consumption support, savings, coaching, encouragement, home visits, all of this put together. What was the evidence across the 7 countries that JPAL and IPA researchers tested this in, which is essentially Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Ghana, Honduras, India, Pakistan, and Peru. And it really suggests that it is possible to make sustainable improvements in the economic status of the poor with relatively short-run interventions compared to, age-old social protection, decade-long social protection systems that we have. And so I think we have found consistently broad and long-lasting impacts economic impacts across these countries. Essentially means that participating households' consumptions increased by 6.5% relative to the comparison group after 2 years, and households experienced similar improvements in food security, asset building, as well as savings. Alongside, if you go deeper into this, the results were really from a shift from menial labor to more stable self-employment. And that's an important shift to bear in mind. And it's important to note that this was largely consistent across contexts and across implementing partners across countries. It's a luxury to have evidence that is cross-country on a program like this. And I think just looking at the long-run effects, the benefits sustained across the long run. In Bangladesh, we studied the model, started in 2007, and additional surveys were conducted in 2018. And 11 years post the intervention, additional surveys just showed that women who received this program were more likely to be self-employed, own assets, earn more. So they did not sell away the assets. Not only did the effects sustain, but they actually increased over time in India too, where, of course, Professor Banerjee, Esther, and co-members have tested this in Murshidabad in West Bengal. And again, we find the persistence of impacts, right? While starting out from livestock, beneficiaries, diversify to non-farm micro enterprises, and and then to wage income secured from migration. That's also an interesting finding, because beneficiary households do even better over the long run as a result of this big push, which helps their micro enterprises do better and better and better over the, and it's the income gains are sustained over time. So the question is, how can this evidence be scaled? And I think in the first presentation we heard, small is beautiful, but large is necessary, and I couldn't agree more. But I think over the last decade, JPAL has partnered closely with Bandhan and with multiple state governments, 4 state governments, Bihar, Odisha, Rajasthan, and Jharkhand. And of course, the other yellow ones are where Bandhan is working by itself to scale up this model, to really adapt, pilot, and scale the graduation approach through different models. So initially, there were the DIV-funded pilots that we did in one district of Odisha and Bihar, and also, in fact, Rajasthan, which was essentially Bandhan-led, but government gave a blessing and supported it financially and in different ways. But then we soon realized that to achieve scale, you want to integrate it within the government ecosystem. And that's exactly what we tried in Bihar. And since 2014, it is this long-run partnership that we've had with Jivika, with the government of Bihar, where it piloted this government-led, adapted model of the graduation approach. And in 2018, as you all know, the Bihar CM announced the scale-up of this SJY program to 1 lakh households in the state. And this is really the first government-led scale-up of the graduation approach that we have seen. And I think our role here is really been around multifaceted, but I think before getting into that, I think it's important to see, and I think John alluded to this, is how they are leveraging their community institutions to do this. So it is not developing a parallel infrastructure, but actually building on what you already have and having a dedicated frontline staff for the SJY program to ensure quality hand-holding support, which is super important, and I think Professor Hashmi referred to this as well. So I think just in terms of partner roles, I think, over the years we decided that this is how it panned out. So Jivika is, of course, leading the implementation. I'm really missing Bala sir here, because he has been this thought leader, champion, and bringing in this organizational excellence that is absolutely unparalleled to support this program, to co-create a version that works for the state. And Bandhan, the NGO, is, of course, providing the necessary technical assistance to support program design and contextualization. And they have established basically a cadre of SJY machinery at different levels. So they block, district, state, all 3 levels. They have representatives of Bandhan. And JPAL's role has been on a learning and knowledge partner across this, to keep giving feedback loops to the government on what aspects are working, not working, tweak it, and really be a scale-up catalyst through this knowledge and data monitoring learning role that we have played. And so as learning and knowledge partner, we work in collaboration with both Jivika and Bandhan, on a daily basis to look at the various ways of the program adaptation. So we have done process maps, based on the initial randomized evaluations, to understand the best way to scale this. To coming up with that model itself was not easy. And multiple conversations, iterations, brainstormings, workshops, field visits, to co-create this scalable model, which still maintains the fidelity of the core components of the evidence that were tested. And of course, we have reached about over 10,000 women just through the surveys. So we are collecting this process data as we speak. And I think the feedback loop has been super important. So we've conducted over 12 surveys on critical thematic areas of the programs, including, how is the identification process going? How is the enterprise selection process going? How is hand-holding coming along? And giving feedback that these are the aspects, these are the gaps. Beneficiary feedback on the program, 2 surveys around this have been conducted. How can that be improved in cases where, there is not as much satisfaction? The workforce, in this case, the MRP or the master resource person's capacity building. So here, I think an interesting thing was that, surveys on efficiency and capacity building of these last mile agents led the Jivika team to provide them with a mobile app and additional training, because what they realized was the monitoring was getting too, they were moving away from too much mentoring as the core component to just monitoring. So I think just maintaining that balance and increasing the capacity and having additional capacity training for these last mile agents was super important. And a recent survey that we did on business progress, which again helped uncover how participants are performing. And we found that a subset of the participants needed additional support because their businesses were not doing as well. So now we are analyzing that, those results and telling Jivika that, okay, these guys need more support, and how is it that you can support them better. So I think those kinds of things, right, just constant data and feedback loops to Jivika. And concurrently, what we are doing is we're also doing a randomized evaluation because we won't let that go. In Bihar, in Sahasra, Sewan, and Purnia, 3 districts. And that is basically to test this government-led version, so that, and so by mid next year, we will actually have the results of an RCT, which is testing not only an NGO-led version, but the first government-implemented version of the graduation approach. And we're very excited about, I'm hoping that from what we see from the process surveys, it seems like it's going well, but of course, results will tell. So I think that's really been our journey with Jivika Bandhan and this whole learning as we go on the graduation approach. And so going forward, I think we would really want to share what's happening in Bihar to enable more and more states to look at this. But of course, finding the right champions is also going to be very important along the way. So that's something I wanted to definitely say. And so in this, really creating the relevant, unique, impactful resources that will be relevant for all organizations working in this sector, but equally the governments. So we're coming up with a process document of whatever we've learned in Bihar, and hopefully this will be a useful tool for other governments as they adopt this. And even MORD. And again, I think we want to continue this role as knowledge and learning partner to help find new geographies to scale up the graduation approach. And of course, study emerging themes on system strengthening and so on. And we'll continue to work with the SJY team in creative and innovative ways to inform the scale up in Bihar. Thank you.
Thank you. You've heard from all the discussants. Now we'd like to open up for questions, comments, anything, but keep it to like 2 minutes so we can hear from many of you, and then we'll have the discussants respond. So are there mics out there? Who's taking care of that? Please be ready. And can we have, is there just one microphone there? Two. So have them be placed right there, close to the middle. Yeah. Go ahead and please introduce yourselves.
My name is Suryamani Rahul. I'm a practitioner in livelihoods. Very specific questions. What has been your experience and evidence, both the last panel member also, for the duration of a family graduating to quote unquote your version middle class? What has been the duration, time? Number 2, what is your experience in social welfare programs overshadowing the economic part of it, economic programs? Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. No, we'll take a few questions and then respond. Anybody else? And it doesn't have to be questions, it has to be comments. Please.
Well, I'm tempted to speak also because possibly I have the longest association with the Ultra Poor program of BRAC from 2001, when the program first started in 2000. I was one of the DFID evaluators to go there and look at the program, and I really do want to share one small story, if you'll permit me. Rabia Appa Shamiran, she was the head of the program. And I looked at the sheet when they were showing us how the story had gone, and out of, there were 9,988 women who had graduated out of 10,000 who were part of the pilot. And I asked Rabia, what happened to the 12? Like, first of all, we are not in India used to seeing that kind of success, right? Something has to go wrong. And then 12, and she told me, Smita, we couldn't help it, 8 of them died. You know, I still remember the hair rising up and tears coming to my eyes because BRAC was following each and every woman. And then she went to the drawing board and she took, and 4, the other women had floods or other things happening, and she took permission from DFID and BRAC senior management to do the second round of support to the people who wouldn't make it, and that became an important feature of the program. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's delightful to see the growth and the spread and everything, and also, of course, the RCTs and the proof. I would also add one thing to Rahul's question, is about, you know, the recent iteration of the program, at least in BRAC, is that the grant has been replaced now by a zero interest loan. And I'm wondering whether you are looking at a comparison of what this means, because even earlier in BRAC this was being tried, especially a targeted ultra poor program with loans for this less ultra poor, you know, slightly higher level, and then the extreme poor would get grants, and the higher, slightly higher would get zero interest loans, because of course no donor and nobody wants to spend $400 per family if they can manage to spend $250, because then you can cover a larger number of people. So I'm just wondering whether, you know, there are lessons on that being captured in your research. Thank you.
Yes, please, way at the back. No. There was somebody way at the back, yes. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. This was really, really inspiring. I think there is so much knowledge and experience sitting there right now. So really, I would say overwhelmed right now. My question is, while we have seen the graduation model, we have been talking, reading, listening a lot about it, and I'm sure a lot of institutions in this hall are trying to replicate that. Is there a postgraduate or a PhD doctorate model as well, where we kind of see, you know, individual entrepreneurs now transforming to become enterprises and kind of also generating employment? Would love to hear, you know, from Professor, you know, about if something similar has happened at BRAC, and probably from other people as well. I think Natalie spoke about the, I think, opportunity and need that is there in India, while we definitely intend to replicate the BRAC model, the graduation model. Very curious to know the further versions of this model in terms of creating enterprises and generating employment. Thank you.
Could you introduce yourself, please? You didn't.
Thank you. So my name is Varun Kashyap. We run a social enterprise called Let's Endorse. We work with individuals to enable them, you know, with building their capacity, access to credit, mentorship, value chain integration, so that they can earn a sustainable monthly income as micro entrepreneurs. Yeah, thank you.
Let's take one or two more. There was somebody over there. Yes, please.
I'm Mona Dave. I'm with Nudge, and we are deployed at MORD, Ministry of Rural Development, the NRLM. I just wanted to have one thing, that canvas is too large. We need to reach out, you know, more number of people. And there are ultra poor, like John raised this question, two questions. One is that it's very high investment model. And the second thing is that what do you call the identification of ultra poor. So there are ultra poor within ultra poor. So ultra poor graduation approach, and do we have mentoring ultra poor graduation approach minus grant? Are we thinking of that approach? Because mentoring is the key thing, and it's required for any kind of ultra poor. So, thank you.
Thank you. We'll have the discussants respond to some of these questions, and then I'll come back to you again. First of all, maybe on the experience and evidence so far, especially not just in graduation, and you've presented a lot of that, but maybe on Jivika. I know you're not ready to publish anything, because a lot of people keep asking me that. The experience and evidence of SJY, and the evidence around the economic components of social welfare programs. If you could respond to that, please.
Yes, I think on the RCT of SJY, I will not be in a position to respond because we've done a baseline and the end line is going to happen in March of 2024. So we'll be in a position to answer that question only then. But I think to your question, the first question of the economic impacts and whether they graduate to middle class, I think these are essentially households which are left out of social security altogether, right? They are into manual labor, they are into these kinds of professions, menial jobs. So I think the goal of this program was really to bring them into the social security fold and for them to be self-sustained post this program. It was, I think, there is going to be probably the PhD version of this will only graduate them to the middle class. I think that's still a long way. So for instance, in Murshidabad, they started off with less than, I think, 3,000 rupees per month. And in 11 years, they graduated to about 34,000 a month of income. So I think that middle class leap is still a few steps away, but I think this is a path to get them into the social protection security net.
All right, I'd like to ask the two of you, nudge and trickle up, the question of high investment model. Every finance minister, I don't know about India, but everywhere else where we've approached them, that's the one thing they point out, high cost. How do you respond to that? You can go first.
I'm actually going to steal something that BRAC says often, which is it is a high investment, but it's also a high return. When you look at the impact over time, and we saw some graphs that were shared here about the growing impact and the sustained impact over more than 10 years, it is a high resource intense program, but the returns happen and sustain over time. And so actually it's very cost effective. There is a study being conducted in Uganda, the first phase of which with refugee populations, which included one arm of the study without seed grant. And what was shown in that particular study is that the participants did in fact catch up to the same levels as the arm of participants that had seed capital, but it just took them a lot longer. So that investment, that seed capital, is in fact one of the hurdles, right, for adoption, but it essentially accelerates the change. So without the seed capital, it just takes a longer time to graduate. And can I talk about post-graduation very briefly? Yeah, so I think this is a really important point because the graduation approach takes women and families to a certain level where they accumulate some resources, they have some savings, but they are still very vulnerable to falling back into poverty. And we saw that explicitly during COVID. And we've been doing some really interesting work around women who have graduated with individual livelihoods coming together to form collective enterprises or farmer interest groups, which really is like a rung on the ladder that Heshmi was talking about. And so there are progressive ladders out of poverty, including collectivizing and then including joining farmer interest groups or farmer producing organizations where they become shareholders of a much larger established institution. So it takes a while, but there is definitely a pathway out of poverty that is sustainable and really creates a lot of resilience.
Sure. Yeah. On the investment, Natalie answered it really well, so I don't know how much I can add on top of it. I think what's really important is to look at cost effectiveness of the model in comparison to other available approaches. I'm sure in this room we'll all agree if tomorrow we find another approach that's far more cost effective than the one that we have available today for the poorest of the poor, we'll switch. So that's really what's important, and this approach today is cost effective as it's delivered. That said, experiments like the one in Uganda need to be done more in Indian context because we have varying conditions of access to markets, access to entitlements, and we may learn new things here, and so we need to continue to do experiments. That's part of what we are trying to do at the Nudge, to keep our feet wet and continue to contextualize the approach in multiple contexts.
On the post-graduation, just want to say a couple of things here. In the late 1990s, in the context of Bangladesh and also everywhere else, because remember at that time with the MDG, there's a huge number of people that were in extreme poverty. So the big challenge there was, how do we get them out of there? And graduation model and all this and other efforts, entitlements, all came into play. And we have been succeeding. It's been going down. But the issue then becomes what happens, especially for graduation after the 2 years. And the one thing Natalie said was there's this risk of backsliding. How do you protect them against that? In Bangladesh, if it's BRAC, BRAC has a lot of different programs that they connect with and they keep on moving. But then it's not just about moving beyond poverty, but one thing that many of us strongly feel is keep on going up. And I said this before, big part of the emerging middle class. And here we have to take more of an ecosystem approach. My colleague Shweta Banerjee talked about the ecosystem thing, and that's important. So that's several things. One, the value chain, backward linkages, forward linkages, what could happen. Secondly, it's about productivity increases. So yes, if you're doing milk, yes, you gain some by being, rather than individually selling it to a collective, the whole dairy co-ops and all that. But more important than that is diversification. And a lot of young people want to go beyond what they would earn in agriculture at that level. And they're looking for jobs. They're looking for high-tech jobs. So how do we prepare them for that? So employment pathways become a distinctly important way for graduation and to continue to beyond graduation. For a lot of places like sub-Saharan Africa, for example, it's smallholder farmers. So what do we do in this whole model of subsidy plus linkages, plus loans in some cases? What do we do to get them to be more risk-averse farmers, to experiment with new type of cropping, new mechanisms of cropping, new ways of doing irrigation, water, fertilizer, pesticide, to increase that. So the focus very strongly now is not just the graduation, but graduation going towards something larger and bigger. That is the dream both for BRAC and for all of us here. Second round of questions? Questions, comments, anyone? Yeah, I have. Is there anyone? Because I'd like to ask them to reflect on something if you don't. Greg, go ahead, please.
I'm Navarun. Actually, I work with the corporate social responsibility organizations. And one of the kind of things that we have found out is that the local politics at the village level and also at the middle level, they do come into the way while we go in for identification of the poor people. Now, what kind of strategies have, say, for example, Bihar adopted in order to take care of this kind of local nuisances which actually hamper the process of selection of the ultra poor?
You've done it.
Sure. So I'll share learnings. I think we are implementing directly in a few locations in India, and we are also helping and working with Jharkhand. I actually would love if our Jharkhand colleagues here also chip in and answer this question. It's a lot of learning from SJY as well. So without going into a lot of double click on this, the necessary step is to align the selection process and the selection outcome with the community at the end of your process. And this is done differently in different contexts. Take the example of SJY or JSLPS. The village organization finally has to endorse the selected participants. And if they are able to endorse, we have seen that there isn't really a lot of pushback or meddling with that has happened. Now, however, I think we should continue to learn. In different contexts, the influence of such forces might be different. What we have learned and observed, and I'm sure Sharanya can add, in Bihar and Jharkhand, we've seen that it works fine, and I think that's a very good design, which is why I was also emphasizing that the involvement of women-led community institutions is making graduation approach stronger, I feel. But happy to.
No, I think the role of the VOs, as John said, it has been really critical in Bihar. And of course, there is, it varies by, village to village. But by and large, I think this additional layer really helps in making sure that the PRA process is smooth.
I just want to add quickly, this is a question I ask myself a lot because it does take time and energy to do the selection process. And at Trickle Up, at least, we try to triangulate. So we definitely talk with the village and we ask them, where the poorest families are. We share the criteria. There are some very clear criteria. And we also walk. Like we literally walk around the entire village and say, what's that house down there? Who lives there? So you have to triangulate so that you really are capturing and including the most vulnerable and the poorest. But I would say there is a cost to that. And it's something that I've been asking myself, should we be spending 3-6 months really finding the most excluded because there's an opportunity cost and to that. But triangulation and really going the extra mile, literally, not just figuratively, is our approach.
In the Philippines, since this national government approach, we get the data from our National Household Targeting Office. It's a division in the Department of Social Welfare. But this data, not just the DSWD, it is used in our other national government agencies. This data, or this survey is conducted every 3 to 4 years. So the latest list that was conducted was done last 2019, and that was launched last year. So the NHTO does this proxy means test. This is to identify. This is a house-to-house, like a census, to determine if you are already tagged, you will be tagged as poor or non-poor. So it's a methodology. Then the cash transfer will based on that list to get those eligible beneficiaries, which are the households with 0 to 18 years old children, and those who are pregnant women at that time of registration. So all over the Philippines, this is the basis for the inclusion for the cash transfer social protection program.
The last question, and that's going to be my question to all of you. Shamiron very strongly stated that the need for governments to make larger commitments, to look at these sort of programs, and for policymakers to change their perspectives so we can really move forward in eradicating extreme poverty and ensuring the vulnerable come in. So in the case of, I'll start with the Philippines, what you should be doing, and in the case of India, and frankly, I've been extremely encouraged from talking to a few of the, over the years, district collectors. Some of them are, or a lot of them are young, so dynamic. Also feels like whether it's NRLM, SRLM, the Ministry for Tribal Affairs, Ministry for Social Justice we talked to a while ago, there is a lot of commitment, but how do we get them to really accelerate this? I'll start with the Philippines. What do you need to do for your government? What does DSWD need to do to make your government commit more to this sort of strategies, convergence, to ensure and lowering extreme poverty?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, we wanted to focus more on the convergence, what you said, because right now, the conditional cash transfer and sustainable livelihood is a two different programs. So technically, it's not like if you're a four-piece beneficiary, you're already enrolled to SLP. No, that's not what we do. But through your pilot program, which is Padayon, yeah, that was recently conducted, the pilot project, we see the clarity of this program that we really need to contemplate these two programs because the SLP right now does accept walk-in or referrals. But if we follow the process of Padayon, we will focus more on the beneficiaries of 4Ps. That was identified as poor or the poorest of the poor households. So with this convergence or the complementation of the program, this is a big help to us because we will use the targeting system to identify who's ready to be more socioeconomic involved. So with that, I think that's our way forward to improve the convergence, the complementation of these programs.
Yeah, I think I just want to caveat this by saying that we're all in this journey learning. But I do want to say this, that what we have seen just in this last 9 months has been extremely encouraging. And here are the numbers. When we started talking to Jharkhand October of the year before, so it's been exactly a year, we wanted Jharkhand, or let me put it the other way, Jharkhand was very keen because they were already working with particularly vulnerable tribal groups, and they were really keen to adopt the graduation approach, and we were able to play a role in sort of securing the innovation funding vehicle that's available within the Ministry of Rural Development, without going into a lot of technical details on it, to help Jharkhand kick-started on adopting the graduation approach. And Jharkhand is well on its way to implement strong in a technically sound and strong manner. Now that was October. Today, as we speak, we've got